So it was getting time to get the Bullitt ready to go down to the dyno. I had a good appointment set up. I did some things to clean up under the hood. I polished this Canton aluminum radiator tank. I did everything that you would do to get ready for the dyno appointment. I even wet sanded and polished the SVT logo on the supercharger. Regapped the plugs, everything was just right. The Bullitt did struggle with getting old and having the ignition coil wires start to go bare on the connectors. And the problem with that is I wouldn't know if I was getting a misfire from a bad ignition coil or if it was from a bad connector. I had extra ignition coil connectors like this that I had cut off other cars that were in wrecking yards that looked good, and I wired them and soldered them on and everything, and they seemed to be doing really well. I was trying to make sure that everything was ready for this dyno appointment. As you may have seen in the previous videos, it seems like every time I went to the dyno I had some sort of trouble and I had to come back, and it really bothered me. So I got the car all loaded up, I rented a U-Haul, and I got down to Dyno Jet. And I was really excited, really nervous. I had the car on the dyno, and he started getting it prepped. You can see he's just plugging in the different things here. Here's a boost reference plug-in. This is where he taps in to look at the ignition and different parameters. But the Bullitt was on the rollers and it was time to make some good power. And so this was the best tune that was tuned for wide open. So the Bullitt put down 439 horse, 437 torque. It was a really good pull, and that was with conservative timing and everything, and it had the upper 276 pulley on the Eaton and the stock size lower, and I could have put a bigger lower on and got more boost. It was only making 11 pounds of boost because it flowed so well with the cams and everything. The tuner said, okay, everything looks good, car's ready to go. Let's get some ice. We'll cool it down a little bit because it was like 90 degrees. This was in Las Vegas and it was in the summer and it was hot. So my brother went over and he bought some ice at a 7-Eleven, and we put that ice in the intercooler tank and we tried to cool the car down. And so he started it back up, got it going on the rollers again, and he did a pull and he let off and said, "I think you lost a cylinder." And we looked at the graph and you could see this big drop, and we looked it over and we figured out, no, it didn't lose a cylinder. Luckily it was a misfire. We had lost an ignition coil. So we were looking at all the ignition coils, and I knew that I was battling this before. I had brought a bunch of spares with me, and we tried everything we could to get that misfire to go away. Looking back, I figured out that it was the ignition coil that was right underneath the air intake, so it was the hardest one to get to, and we had swapped all the other ones out and it didn't make any difference. And so he said, well, the car is tuned for wide open, it's very conservative, 440 horse basically at the wheels, it does really well, you can drive it like that. And I said, okay, well, I'll go get that figured out and bring it back. And he said, okay, well, if you bring the car back, I'm going to charge you at least $200 just to strap it down and finish the tune. And so I thought, well, heck, it's not worth traveling all the way back here just to finish it off again. The next time I come back, I'll have a VMP supercharger for it. So that was my plan. My plan was to return with more upgrades. And so we ended the tuning there. We put the car back on the trailer. And I was pretty happy because the car was tuned safe for wide open throttle at least, and it was making 440 to the wheels. Now the Bullitt would later make 520 on the same setup, so over 500 to the wheels, which is what I was actually hoping the car would make. The only issue was now the car had a issue with hot start. So the biggest problem was if it was hot and you started the car, it had too much fuel and startup, and it wouldn't start unless you held the accelerator down and turned the injectors off for a second, and then it would fire right up every single time. Cold start, fire it up every single time. So at least it ran great, but there were some tuning things that the car did need a retune. And I remember talking to other tuners, and they said, well, if the temperature is set up wrong in the computer, then the car thinks it's hot and it doesn't want to start as well. I forgot what it was. I think it was an IAT issue. There were just other things that made it so that that could have been better on the tuner's end. He could have done a little bit better on getting the car set up for startup and everything, but it really wasn't that bad. I daily drove it like that every day and it was fine. And so I didn't want to mess around anymore. I again bought brand new TR6 NGK spark plugs, gapped them down to 32, and then I bought all brand new Ford OEM ignition coils. So I swapped all that in and I checked all the connections, and then the Bullitt ran perfect again. No more misfire, absolutely beautiful. And you'll see how good it runs in this clip right here. This is with my cousin having some fun.
Second gear pull on the Bullitt. Oh dang, that really did put me in the seat. Felt it hardcore.
So my little brother had inherited this Saturn Sky from my grandpa. It was a super low mile car. It only had a few thousand miles on it, and he was always trying to set up races against my brother's Mach 1 and my Mach 1, and it was a potent little car. It was like a baby Corvette. They really are pretty quick, and so he wanted to race the Mach 1, and it was pretty close. This is a quick video of how it stood up against the red Mach 1. So it did pretty well, and then he took it down somewhere and had the boost turned up on it and made it a lot faster, and the smack talk got even worse, and he was saying how bad he was going to gap the Mach 1s and everything. And finally I said, well, let's run it against the Bullitt if you're so confident. And so here's the run against the Bullitt, even with it turned up. I think it was at 20 pounds of boost or more on his car. So he got gapped, along with a whole bunch of other cars, and I have the list I'll show you. Matter of fact, let me go show you the list right now. I've talked about this in my previous videos. I've talked about how I've won so many races with the Bullitt, and that I wrote down these races, and they're not all on here, but this is just a list, and you can see I have Mach 1 on the left, Bullitt in the middle, and Cobra on the right on these columns, and you can see on this list as you go down, these are all the ones the Bullitt has won, and it took several pages to fill these up. And this was a lot of racing, and there are a lot of really neat cars on here that I beat that are very fast cars. and beating them a lot was driver race, and a lot of it was me having drag radials and good traction while the other guys spun. But let's go through this list just a little bit. I know it's hard to see, but you've got a few Subaru WRXs, Camaro RS, and Mustang GT for '03. You've got, GTIs, Chargers, Firebird Trans Am, and as it goes better, LS1 GTO, Lightnings, 5.0 Mustangs, a few newer 2012 Camaro. I mean, there are just so many on here. 2016 Camaro. There are so many on there. Scat Pack Challenger, ZL1 Camaro. There are a lot of really potent cars on that list. There's around 100 cars on there that I've beat with this car, and a lot of those were before the supercharger, when the Bullitt had gears and headers, and then the next stage when it had the built engine with cams and 300 rear wheel horsepower, and then of course the Porta Eaton making the 440 to the wheels. And so the Bullitt was very potent, and it was very fast for what it was, and it wasn't the fastest car in town, but it was one of the fastest cars in town at the time. I remember after one of my races, I made this sweater, and when I mean I made the sweater, I mean I took a picture of a Gap sweater and I wrote "you" underneath with just, an app on the phone. It wasn't real, but I just thought it was really funny. So I posted this on my Instagram, and I had a few people said, "Hey, I'll take one of those. If you make those, I'll buy one." But anyway, the Bullitt was turning out to be an awesome daily driver even more. I drove it like this everywhere. I won races in it. I took it down the racetrack and everything. But some of the coolest thing about daily driving this car was the idle. And everybody loves cams. People talk about how they want to do cams because of the sound it makes, not really because of the performance gain. Because the truth is, usually you can add boost and make more power than what you're going to get out of cams for the money and everything. And I'm not sure about this, but to me it seems like the supercharger added some more displacement, kind of like in the intake manifold area and into the heads, and it made it so that it seemed like it was an even deeper grunt when it was at idle with these cams. And so the car got really known for having a awesome idle, and I had a million people asking me on Instagram all the time, "What's your setup? What cams are those? They sound so good." And so I had a lot of idle videos. So here are some idle videos of the Bullitt and how good it sounded, and some of these videos have some revs in them too. I really loved how loud this car was. When you were standing behind the car, it vibrated the air in your lungs. When you're trying to talk to somebody and have a conversation when you're standing behind the car when it's idling, you could hardly hear the person. You could hardly talk to them. This is a cool comparison I took of how a nice, decently loud Mach 1 idle is compared to the idle of the Bullitt. And the Mach 1 had SLPs and a Catadex pipe. Here's the Mach 1. And here's the Bullitt. Man, that's so loud, and that video does good justice. And here is my red Mach 1 that had an off-road H-pipe and SLP exhaust compared to the Bullitt. You can tell you can still hear the Bullitt over the Mach 1. sounds incredible, from the supercharger whine to the loud exhaust and the cams. Everything on this car was awesome. Best two valve you can make, in my opinion, right there. So stay tuned for the next part of the Bullitt story. It's coming up. And thanks for watching. I really appreciate all the nice comments. A lot of you say really nice things, and you know, a lot of these videos that you're seeing here are helping build this car up in popularity. A lot of people love this car. And so I just wanted to thank everybody for spending the time to watch the video and getting to see a little bit of what I mean when I say that this Bullitt meant the world to me, and it had so much put into it, and it is an incredible car with an incredible story. So there are still parts to come, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.